In March 1945, a report from the War Department about how prisoners of war were treated in the United States had an interesting note from Central Illinois. A short line hidden in pages of numbers said a group of German women prisoners were allowed to walk into town without anyone watching them. No chains, no guards, just ration books and trust. It seemed like a mistake, but it was true. These women were prisoners of a falling empire, captured far away and brought across the ocean. Most Americans, still sad about sons lost in France and the Pacific, couldn't believe it. But behind the wooden fences of Camp Donnelly, one of many camps in the Midwest, a quiet test of kindness was happening. The guards at Donnelly were mostly older men, too old to fight, who had seen the First World War and remembered its mud and quiet years after. They knew what hate did to countries and didn't want to add to it. So when the first group of German women arrived, nurses, clerks, and helpers captured in France, they didn't face punishment. They found something they were told enemies didn't have: kindness. Official records say that under the Geneva Convention, the United States let prisoners work, earn money, write letters, and even have supervised fun. But the action that later shocked the nation went beyond rules. For 1 week in spring 1945, a group of women who once served the Reich were given something more risky than freedom: trust. And it changed everything they thought about their enemies. This was the week Germany's daughters found kindness on American land. They came from every part of a war that had already taken their youth. Some were nurses from field hospitals in France. Others were clerks with supply units in North Africa. A few had worked on hospital ships stopped in the Atlantic. By 1944, thousands of German women had been captured by the Allies. Not soldiers, but uniformed helpers tied to a cause that was falling apart. They had been told what to expect if caught. Nazi radio spread rumors of American death camps, cruelty, shame, and hunger. They thought they'd be marched through enemy towns, spat on by crowds, maybe even killed. Fear made them tougher than loyalty ever did. They got on ships to America, expecting revenge. But when the ships reached New York, Boston, and Norfolk, they didn't see soldiers with whips or angry crowds. They saw nurses in white coats, Red Cross workers giving out blankets, and American MPs speaking politely in broken German. The shock in their eyes was clear. These were the monsters they'd been warned about. Trains took them inland, past quiet towns and endless cornfields, to the heart of America. The trip was long, but unlike the packed cattle cars they imagined, each woman had a seat, food, and water. The guards watched quietly, rifles hanging but never raised. Some prisoners cried, not from fear, but from a new feeling: safety. When they got to Camp Donnelly, the gates were tall but not scary. The fences had wire on top, but inside were flower beds, dorms with clean sheets, and a mess hall that smelled of coffee and bread. For the first time in years, they could sleep without hearing bombers. In that moment, the world they knew started to break. War had taught them to expect only cruelty from enemies. But here, in the country they were taught to hate, they found order, decency, and a strange, confusing kindness. That kindness scared them more than any guard could. In the months after they arrived, the women learned Camp Donnelly wasn't a fluke. It was planned. The War Department and Red Cross agreed the United States would show its moral strength not by punishing but by holding back. Every meal, every medical check, every letter sent home was part of a bigger test. Washington knew what Berlin didn't: how you treat prisoners shows a nation's heart. The way we treat their prisoners will affect how they treat ours, a War Department official wrote in 1944. For many Americans, this was just being decent. For others, it was a smart way to weaken the enemy. Kindness could be stronger than fear. The guards at Donnelly were told to follow the Geneva Convention exactly. The women could work in sewing shops or farms, earning a few cents a day. They could sing, learn English, and even keep pets. It wasn't freedom, the wire was still there, but it was different from what they expected. When Red Cross inspectors came, they found no mistreatment. In fact, they noticed something odd. The German prisoners seemed happy. To the American leaders, this proved their plan worked. To the prisoners, it was something they couldn't explain or doubt. Many guards believed the best way to break an enemy's beliefs was to show kindness. Every loaf of bread, every polite word, was meant to undo the propaganda that shaped these women. Slowly, it worked. The Reich's stiff pride turned into quiet teamwork. Suspicion became gratitude. America's moral test was succeeding, but no one knew how far it would go. Because soon, Someone suggested an idea that went beyond rules, beyond logic, and even beyond the guards' comfort. A single choice that would test if trust could survive war. Inside the camp, life settled into a rhythm no one expected. Mornings started with the mess hall bell, then the smell of oatmeal, bacon, and coffee, a scent most hadn't known since before the war. Each barack had chores, its own little world. The women swept, washed uniforms, tended gardens, and sometimes sang as they worked. The guards watched from the fences, not as jailers, but as keepers of a fragile peace. Most were farmers or teachers before the war, men with families. They called the women the girls, though many were their age. At first, orders banned talking beyond what was needed, but words slipped out. A good morning, a thank you, a nervous laugh when a dog stole bread from the kitchen. By summer, the camp felt different. The fences were still there, but they seemed less important. The prisoners painted the recreation hall, planted flowers by the gate, and started a small orchestra with instruments donated by the local church. On Sundays, guards stood outside, hearing faint Beethoven notes in the Illinois air. When local farmers needed help, the women worked in fields, picking corn, packing crates, and returning tired but happy. One wrote in her diary, "I almost forgot the war today. The sky here is too big for hate." For the guards, it was a strange peace to live among those who, by war's rules, were enemies but seemed like sisters or daughters back home. Some began to question who was really an enemy or friend. Inside those fences, something unexpected grew. Not sympathy, but understanding. And once understanding started, it was hard to stop. The mail room was the camp's most special place. Every few weeks, bags of letters arrived, thin envelopes from across the ocean, worn by distance and war. The women lined up quietly, waiting for their names. Sometimes letters had blank spots where censors cut out forbidden words. Sometimes they brought the worst news: a husband missing, a brother dead, a home destroyed by Allied bombs. But there were other letters, ones the women wrote themselves, to mothers in Saxony, children in Hamburg, sisters they hadn't seen in years. In those letters, something surprising appeared: confusion. "They treat us kindly," one wrote. "The guards are polite. We can walk on Sundays. They feed us better than our own soldiers did." Censors noticed the tone but let it pass. Washington wanted those words to reach Germany. The Reich built its power on hate, believing kindness was weak. But in this American prison, that belief was falling apart. The women wrote about recipes, flowers, and the friendliness of townspeople. Some asked their families to tell the truth if the Allies reached their village. "They are not monsters," one letter said, "just men tired of killing." One evening, a guard found a woman sitting outside, staring at the sky. When he asked what she was looking at, she said softly, "The same stars we saw in Europe. It makes me wonder if we ever really left home." That night, the camp felt different. The fences, searchlights, and rifles seemed smaller compared to the questions growing in everyone's minds. If kindness could survive here, what was the war for? Word spread beyond the camp. A truck driver delivering supplies told his wife the women prisoners at Donnelly laughed and sang while working. By the next week, half the town knew, and not everyone was happy. The United States was still fighting. Sons and husbands were dying in Europe and the Pacific. Yet here, the enemy seemed comfortable. The Donnelly Gazette published a letter from a local widow. "Why should our boys starve in foxholes while the enemy eats our bread?" The camp commander, Captain Robert H. Ellis, a man with a straight posture and a farmer's sense of fairness, held a town meeting in the high school gym. His words were clear: "These women aren't fighters. They're prisoners under the Geneva Convention. We must treat them humanely, and we will." Still, whispers spread. Some said the Germans were spies. Others worried they might escape or hurt someone. But the captain stood firm. "They've lost their country," he said quietly. "Let's not lose our decency." The town slowly agreed. Soon, permission came for short, supervised trips to town. The women helped at stores, picked fruit at farms, or bought sewing supplies. The first trip was tense. The prisoners rode in an open truck, wearing gray uniforms marked PW. Shopkeepers froze when they entered. A mother pulled her child close. No one spoke, but nothing happened, no escapes, no trouble. By the third visit, some townspeople softened. The women smiled shyly, thanked shopkeepers in broken English, and paid with ration coupons like everyone else. It wasn't friendship, but it was the first small crack in a wall built by war. It was only a matter of time before someone asked, what if they walked those streets without guards? It started on a quiet Thursday morning in late spring 1945. The war in Europe was ending. Newspapers talked of surrender, Berlin in ruins, Hitler gone. At Camp Donnelly, the news changed everything. The women were no longer prisoners of a living Reich but refugees of a dead one. Captain Ellis, the guards, and even the women, who still folded their uniforms neatly each morning, knew the war that defined them was over. So when the captain suggested letting a small group visit town without escorts, it was more about faith than rules. 5 women were chosen, quiet, cooperative, trustworthy. Each carried a handwritten pass with the U.S. Army seal. No guards, no trucks, just permission to walk a mile to Donnelly's main street to buy fabric, thread, and toiletries. The guards watched them go, gray uniforms crossing fields under a soft blue sky. It felt like a risk no one wanted to say out loud, but the captain said, if we can't trust them now, when can we trust anyone? When the women reached town, shopkeepers froze. A bell rang as the first prisoner entered Dawson's general store. The owner, old Mr. Dawson, stood still. The woman smiled nervously and showed her ration book. Soap, she said in broken English. He paused, then nodded. Within an hour, the tension eased. They visited the post office, bakery, and clothing store. No one ran. No one shouted. Some townspeople even greeted them politely. One young woman, barely 20, laughed softly at rows of bright American candies. She bought 2, keeping one to remember. When they returned at sunset, not one had run or broken trust. The guards saluted them out of habit, and for a moment, no one could tell who was prisoner or free. That evening, the captain wrote in his log, experiment worked, no problems. But for those who saw it, it wasn't just an experiment. It was proof that even in war's ruins, trust could stand. The next morning, the story spread. A young reporter from the Donnelly Gazette, curious after hearing shopkeepers' whispers, arrived at the camp with a camera. The guards, half amused, half nervous, let him wait outside as the women walked by on their next visit. He raised his camera as they passed the bakery, sunlight on their gray uniforms, the open sign hanging above. One woman laughed, holding a bag of bread. Another glanced at the camera, unsure, then smiled. The shutter clicked. That photo, 5 German women prisoners walking free on an American street, ran in the Gazette 2 days later under the headline, Enemy Women Shop Without Guards. Within a week, it was in St. Louis, Chicago, and New York. With every headline, the country split again. Letters poured in. Some accused the army of betraying fallen soldiers. Others said it showed what made America different. If we must show strength, one veteran wrote, let it be strength of heart. The War Department wasn't happy. Officials demanded reports, fearing trouble. But the logs told the same story. No problems, no escapes, no misbehavior. A moral risk had become a quiet win. Meanwhile, Donnelly's people began to see the women differently. The bakery owner who once refused them now greeted them. Children waved. One woman returned a lost wallet to a farmer, and he said she had more honor than most men. The photo did what no speech could. It made Americans see their kindness, and for a moment the enemy looked human. By summer, the story spread beyond Illinois. Other camps heard of the Donnelly test, and some commanders quietly tried it. Across the Midwest and South, German prisoners, even men, were trusted with small freedoms. Farm work without guards, town trips, evening walks. The press called it risky. The War Department called it under review. But the strangest thing? Not one escape attempt was recorded at Camp Donnelly. When asked why, the women's answers were simple. We had nowhere to run, one said. They treated us like people. The irony was heavy. Many women wrote to families in ruined German cities, describing their captors' kindness while their own government had left them. We are safe here, one wrote to her sister in Dresden. They trust us. It feels wrong to be treated so well while Germany burns. Those letters, read by censors, became quiet propaganda, showing decency could do what weapons couldn't. Inside the camp, a new feeling grew. Guards left gates open during the day. Work groups walked to farms with just a sergeant checking in at dusk. Townspeople who once feared the women now waved, sometimes offering lemonade or bread. But the success brought unease. Some soldiers grumbled that prisoners lived better than troops overseas. Others worried they'd grown too close to the captives. Captain Ellis wrote in his journal, "I sometimes forget they were our enemies. Then I remember kindness is what sets us apart." When one woman got sick with pneumonia, the town sent blankets and medicine. The doctor who treated her took no payment. "She's a patient," he said. "That's all." It was war's greatest irony. The defeated learned freedom from their conquerors, and kindness, once seen as weakness, became strength's truest mark. By autumn 1945, the leaves fell around Camp Donnelly, and so did the barbed wire. The war was over. Victory came months earlier, but for the women, freedom felt unsure, a word they didn't trust. When orders came to send them back to Germany, there was no joy, only silence. They had built small lives in America, friendships with guards, gardens they planted, songs at dusk. Now the trucks that brought them waited to take them away. As they packed, a Bible, a photo, a folded blanket, some cried. Captain Ellis stood by the gate as the first bus started. One woman paused, saluted him in the German way, then switched to an American salute, a small, clumsy gesture that choked the captain. He nodded, unable to speak. When the buses left, the camp felt empty. Barracks stood silent, yards quiet, the echo of foreign songs gone. A week later, the fences came down. The land became farmland again. Barracks turned to lumber. Nothing remained but footprints and a wooden sign. Camp Donnelly 1944 to 1945. Years later, letters came from Germany. Some women survived the hard years after the war. They wrote to the townspeople, the captain, the Red Cross. "We remember how you treated us," one said. "It helped us believe we could rebuild." Another wrote, "When we were your prisoners, we learned what freedom might feel like." For Donnelly's people, those words were a quiet comfort. In a world counting victories in cities and deaths, they measured theirs in something smaller, a memory of kindness kept when it mattered most. The true victory wasn't won on foreign soil, but behind the fences they chose to open. In the U.S. Army's records, Camp Donnelly is just a footnote among many POW camps from 1943 to 1946. But its story never really ended. It became a mirror showing a rare thing a nation can do in war: hold back. Historians later said America's kind treatment of German prisoners helped shape how allies were treated in return. Red Cross reports showed news of places like Donnelly reached German lines before the war ended. In ways no one could measure, kindness became a strategy. For the women who lived it, mercy left a deeper mark than any wound. Some returned to Germany as nurses, teachers, or mothers, determined to reject the lies that sent them to war. A few even came back to America, quietly, with new names, carrying a strange love they once feared. The story of the day they walked to town without guards spread slowly, fading into rumor and memory. But for those there, the guards who trusted, the townsfolk who doubted, the women who smiled again, it was an unspoken truth. Trust, once given, changes both sides. In a world burning with hate, Camp Donnelly became a small light, proof that kindness can be stronger than force, and even in war's ruins, decency can win. They came as prisoners, taught to fear their captors. They left as witnesses, carrying proof that enemies could still be human. As the last train left, one guard wrote, "We didn't win this war by hate. We survived it by remembering who we are."